Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. This is Michelle Comer, North Dakota Commissioner of Commerce. Welcome to the more than 1,200 attendees at this special business briefing. Nearly 50 days ago, it became evident that our world was about to change. To what extent, we couldn't imagine at the time, but we knew at the Department of Commerce and Team North Dakota that it would be our focus to support you, North Dakota businesses, our friends and neighbors. Since that time, it's been a goal of ours to provide you real-time information to help you understand and quickly assess the federal financial resources made available through the CARES Act, along with other important information to help businesses through these unprecedented times. 2 weeks ago, you heard us say that our regular business briefings would conclude and we would schedule additional briefings as new information necessitated. In light of recent events, we felt it was time to get the band back together. If you haven't been able to join us for these past several weeks, we recommend that you review prior week's presentations, which are available at ndresponse.gov at the Business and Employer page. Today, we are going to talk about the North Dakota Smart Restart, the name that we've given to the process of easing restrictions while continuing to control the spread of infection. We'll talk about the additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, as well as new financial resources available through the Bank of North Dakota, and other updates, including the status of unemployment insurance expansion and other important information pertaining to insurance coverage. But first, I would like to introduce two important guests, Senator John Hoeven and Congressman Kelly Armstrong, to share their practical guidance and perspective with you in these trying times. First, welcome to Senator Hoeven, and thank you for your advocacy for North Dakota and for North Dakota businesses in particular. Thanks for being with us today.
Michelle, thanks so much for joining me. Can you hear me all right? We
can.
All right, well, thanks to you for inviting me to be with you. Thanks for hosting these important calls along with Eric Spencer and GNDC. Really appreciate you doing it and the chance along with Congressman Armstrong to join you. I'll just give an update on a couple things. I know you've got a full agenda, but first, of course, is the CARES 2.0 Act, if you will, where we appropriated another $484 billion in assistance for the coronavirus fight. On the healthcare side, that's another $75 billion for hospitals, and we're working hard to make sure that that comes to our rural hospitals as well as the large city center healthcare facilities, and also for our other healthcare facilities too, like our nursing homes, for example, which are very, very heavily impacted. The initial $100 billion has not been fully expended. There have been two dispersals from that tranche, and in the second dispersal, again, we worked to make sure that there was funds that were targeted for our rural healthcare centers, and we'll continue to do that, and for our nursing homes and other healthcare facilities. So there is follow-on dollars to that $100 billion that has not been expended, and there's already another $75 billion there in place, as well as another $25 billion for testing. And we know as we open up not only the smart recovery here in North Dakota, but across the country, that testing is very important, and so there's another $25 billion for testing. $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program. That included the $250 billion that we had targeted to take it up to $600 billion, and then set asides for smaller lenders, for example, lenders under $10 billion in footings. We set aside $30 billion there. That has actually already been utilized. Our smaller lenders are doing a fantastic job, and of course, we think they do a great job with getting out to our small businesses. But that $30 billion set aside has been fully utilized. So the small institutions are now drawing off the $250 billion pot along with the other institutions. And also, a couple changes have been made. Al Hout can talk in more detail, but the particularly larger institutions were using robotic processing that was really dominating a lot of the system. They're now having to go back to manual, and there's also a set-aside time for smaller institutions to input their loans. Again, trying to make sure that we're getting to those small businesses. And then the other 30 billion was for institutions between 10 billion and 50 billion in footing. So that's your 310 billion for the PPP program. We also included 50 billion for EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans, and another 10 billion for the grants that go with them. As you know, there's up to 10,000 grants that go with them. And I particularly worked to make sure that that loan program is now available to our farmers and ranchers. So very important to understand that our farmers and ranchers can qualify for both PPP and EIDL as well. Just other couple quick points. For our farmers and ranchers, we're working to get that direct assistance out. That's the $19 billion package, $16 billion in financial assistance directly to farmers and ranchers, another $3 billion in purchases. We're working with USDA to get that done and in place as soon as possible. I'm hopeful that those payments will go out in May. And we're also working very hard to keep our processing plants open with protection equipment, testing, adjustments for shifts and transportation, partitions in the plants. And as you saw here, just a day ago, the president also deployed the Defense Production Act to make sure that those facilities stay open, both so consumers have access to meat at the grocery store, but also it's so important for our livestock producers so they have a place for their animals to go. Otherwise, it creates obviously incredible problems. And then the last point I'll bring up is on energy. Again, the PPP program is there for smaller energy companies. Obviously, our oil industry has been hit very hard by the lack of demand caused by the sheltering in place. But for larger companies, they also need access to credit. So we're working with Secretary of Energy Berlet and Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin on additional lending facilities to make sure that the larger companies have access to credit as well under what we call the 13.3 program, which is the market stabilization program that we passed as part of the CARES Act, as well as the PPP program. And the other point I would make for our energy producers, I do have legislation in that would both authorize the federal government to buy oil to put it in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, as well as $3 billion in funding to do that. I have bipartisan support for that in the Senate, and I also have bipartisan support for it in the House, which is very important because that's why we weren't able to get it in the CARES Act, is because it was blocked in the House. And the good news is we now have a companion bill in the House, bipartisan support. Congressman Kelly Armstrong is on that bill and working hard to help us get it done. And that, Michelle, may be a good place for me to wrap up. Thank again all of you for all you're doing and for the great leadership by Governor Burgum and his whole team, including obviously you, Michelle. And again, big thanks to Eric and my very best to Kelly. And I can turn it back to you, Michelle, or over to Kelly, however you'd like to do it.
Thank you so much, Senator Hoeven. Yes, let's go straight to Congressman Armstrong.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Obviously, thank you, Senator Hoeven. I couldn't do my job as an at-large freshman in the minority without the support of both Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer, and their staffs. And that goes for the people on this call and not just the people from government, whether it's small bankers, small businessmen, all across the state, businessmen and women across the state. One of the reasons we are able to effectively advocate for you all is because you provide us with the exact right and detailed information. And to be quite honest, sometimes I'm almost guilty when I talk to some people in the bureaucracy in DC. They think I'm way more educated on way more things than is actually true. That is simply because the very people on this call are able to provide me with the information, so I sound really smart. That's not necessarily always great for me. What it is great for is North Dakota, because when we do that, we get some more responses. And Senator Hoeven gave obviously a great background, and Michelle and Eric and those guys are going to go through a lot of these programs, and they have more knowledge about the implementation than I do. I would like to just take a little bit to say, one, thanks to everybody on the call. I think we, as unique and oftentimes frustrating as the last couple of months have been, I think it's really impressive how some of this stuff was able to scale up at the federal level. If you would have told me prior to the original implementation of the PPP that it would have been up and running, I would have the Wednesday before the Friday it was announced, I probably wouldn't have thought it would have went as well as it did. We know there are problems. We know there are hitches. But there's also a reason North Dakota was #2 in the nation in processing of those loans. And that has nothing to do with the federal government. It has a lot more to do with the state government and, more importantly, our local community bankers and our small businessmen across the state. Because of that robotics part in the bill, there was some frustration when the second round came. I was getting calls and texts from bankers all over the state at 9 p.m. my time Mountain, so that's 10 o'clock at night, still working to process. I like the idea. I like the fact that they were allowing small banks to do it. I think the communication on the rollout could have been a little better, but all in all, I think it went well. But the only reason it went well is because people were willing to stay as long as it took to get them put through. We'll continue to work for all of these things. I think there's a couple things that are really impressive, particularly if you've been if you've fought with bureaucracies both at the state and the federal level for as long as I have. The dynamic responses we have been able to get in real time changing to some of these programs and implementation has been actually really heartening, whether it's through Treasury or the SBA. We didn't get them all. There's always people that are going to fall through the cracks. But I am really hopeful that when we get back to some semblance of normal, that type of dynamic response from bureaucracy is something that we can maintain. They were forced to do it because we were writing regulations in real time for implementation, but we got feedback from you all, and we responded by getting that information to whether it was Treasury or SBA or IRS or depending on the organization. And they were actually able to make those changes at a lot of those changes. I do want to say a huge thank you to Senator Hoeven. It's a big deal for the state of North Dakota. And this second part, CARES 3.5, really allowed for the freeing up of the federal money for states like North Dakota who have unique challenges with COVID. And that is really important because while we did a good job of making sure all states got some federal money, under the initial implementation, it was very restrictive on how we could use it. And Senator Hoeven worked really hard to make sure that got changed, and it did get changed, and that is going to be a direct benefit from North Dakota. And just more on a more personal note, I'm on, I think, 4 different Neighbors Helping Neighbors pages on social media. And the reaction that we've gotten from our small businesses and our people across the state is really, truly amazing. And I think too much, particularly when we're all sheltered in place and the toxicity of the national media about everything right now, it's an honor to serve a group of people who make as many that are helping their neighbors. And North Dakota is uniquely situated for that. We all know the story of a farmer or a rancher whose neighbor got sick or somebody in the family had an accident, and they drop everything they're doing and they go combine their neighbor's food, help them get their stuff in the bins. And it's that mentality and that attitude that has allowed North Dakota to really kind of excel at maximizing these federal programs. But more importantly, it's going to be that attitude that gets us over the hump as we continue to work through this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to continue to be difficult. Our ag and energy sectors have really, really taken it. And then just last, I'll leave you with this, and this is something that I think is important as we bring back. This has never been about the economy versus health. This smart restart that's being done by the governor's office and the people on this call is important because it's the difference between our society. It's our health and our society. I mean, it's not just a straight economy thing. It is being able to get back and start functioning in with some semblance of normalcy. And I know all of you want that. I want that as well, but also being able to do it where we can control the spread of this virus and do it. Because if we don't do it the smart way, we're going to have a pendulum swing back. But this has never been a fight between, I mean, there's a lot of people that want to say people care more about the economy than people's health. And that's not the point. The point has always been how we maintain who we are as North Dakotans while protecting the most vulnerable among us. So I appreciate everybody on this call. I appreciate everything you've done to help us help you. And we'll keep up the good work and we'll move forward.
Thank you both so much. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for your energy and your accessibility. We are so fortunate. I also want to say thank you to Senator Kramer's office. I believe they had some difficulty getting on the call today. I hope they're on now, and we are just so lucky that all of you are working hard in DC to make sure that North Dakota is positioned as well as possible during a time like this, but always. So thanks again. Before we move on, I have to give another shout out to who we call the Economic Resiliency Team at the state of North Dakota. In addition to Brian Klipfel from Job Service and Worker Safety Insurance and Eric Hardmeyer from Bank of North Dakota and John Godfried, Insurance Commissioner, who are speaking here today, my colleagues Al Jager, the Secretary of State, Ryan Rauschenberger, the Tax Commissioner, Erica Thunder, the Commissioner of Labor and Human Rights, Scott Davis, the Executive Director of Indian Affairs Commission, Lisa Cruz, our Commissioner of the Department of Financial Institutions, and Justin Messner, our Coordinator of Department of Emergency Services. We have all worked together to coordinate our efforts so that we can provide you one message in one voice. So thanks to all of them. These last many weeks, we've adopted this metaphor that we are building the plane while we're flying it, and we are not in charge of the flight pattern. This is an adventure that we did not seek, and even so, I wouldn't want to be on any other plane than the one we're on together, and the Department of Commerce is honored to serve you now and always. We'll go through these next couple slides pretty quickly. As we have stated in the past weeks, each business situation is unique, so we remind you to consult with your attorney, accounting, tax, and financial advisor and banker and lender before making decisions regarding your business. For today's goal, we intend to provide you new information since we were last together, North Dakota Smart Restart guidance, updates on federal and state resources, as well as things to have your eyes on as we move forward. And as always, we have taken care to make sure that this slide deck doubles as a resource kit with links to information that we have vetted for quality and accuracy. Once again, this presentation was designed with your questions in mind. We received around 100 questions in advance of this call, and we have circulated all those questions to the subject matter experts who will address many of them today. If your questions remain unanswered, please email businesshelpcovid19@nd.gov. Again, we won't be providing financial guidance, but we can direct you to resources. We'll be talking more about this in a moment, but for North Dakota Smart Resources, you can head to ndresponse.gov and find the North Dakota Smart Restart page. Now, for those of you listening today, please pass the word on about these resources to those that are not able to be with us. A recording of this call, along with materials, will be available for later use. Also, I'm issuing you a challenge right now. You have surely seen moments in the past several weeks. Congressman Armstrong referred to them a few moments ago. Examples of what it means to be North Dakota strong, North Dakota smart, and in this together. So right now, because I know you have your phones with you, please take a moment to send a text to someone you care about, to say thank you, or to share a word of encouragement. While you're doing that, I'll remind you to tell you that if they text back and ask, "Are you okay?" you may want to consider making this a more regular event. One benefit of having all the lines muted is that I can convince myself that you are laughing at my attempts at humor and that I won't know any different. Please tag us at Commerce ND or at Comer Michelle with any good vibes you have to share. All right, I'm going to presume that you're done with that important text. For today's agenda, we will begin with North Dakota Smart Restart, recently released guidance to all businesses, as well as specific guidance to those affected by executive order that will be permitted to open with safety precautions starting May 1st. After that, Al Hout, our North Dakota SBA District Director, will share information with us about the additional funding for the PPP and EIDL that went live this past Monday. Following that, Eric Hardmeyer, President of the Bank of North Dakota, will share information about new financing resources available. And then Brian Klipfel, Executive Director of Job Service and Worker Safety Insurance, will update us on the latest about unemployment insurance expansion. And finally, Commissioner John Godfried will provide some forward-looking guidance relating to insurance to help us plan for the future. And we will close with remarks from my partner and friend, Eric Spencer of the Greater North Dakota Chamber. So first, let's start with an update on what we are calling North Dakota Smart Restart. What is this and what does it mean? It's important to note that unlike many other states, North Dakota never fully closed for business. That said, Executive Order 2020-6.3 went into effect on March 20th, closing the personal service industries temporarily and limiting service of bars and restaurants. This affected approximately 7% of North Dakota's workforce. We recognize that many others made sacrifices to adapt their business practices for the safety of their employees and customers. And this has been an important part of why we are where we are today. Governor Burgum announced on Tuesday that this order would be modified effective May 1st, allowing personal service businesses and bars and restaurants to open with important safety precautions in place. Executive Order 2020-6.4 was published yesterday describing the conditions under which these close personal contact businesses may reopen and the expectations under which all businesses are expected to operate. Many have asked the question, why now? This slide is part of that answer. These are our 8 criteria for a North Dakota Smart Restart. North Dakota is using less than 1% of its hospital capacity for COVID-19 patients. We rank 6th in the nation in testing per capita. We have the 5th lowest positive test rate. Testing and contact tracing of positive cases continues to grow more robust daily. Tuesday, it was reported that North Dakota ranks #1 for trained contact tracers. We are working to ensure continued protection for our most vulnerable, and we will share with you in a moment the progress on our standard operating procedures. A frequently asked question is this: if our infection rate, in other words, the number of new cases, is not declining, how can we safely reopen? The answer is this: the guidance that suggests waiting for declining positive tests does not factor in the aggressive testing that North Dakota is doing. We are going looking for it. Because of this, it is expected that our positive cases will be increasing. I mentioned these 8 criteria for a North Dakota Smart Restart is part of the answer. The other part of the answer, and perhaps the most important part, is each of us. We each have individual accountability to be disciplined both for ourselves and for others. We must respect that we are not through this. We are at the beginning. Yesterday, it was reported that Germany, who had fared well in their initial control of infection, was experiencing a surge upon reopening that may send them into a place of even greater restriction. A small island in Japan that had well controlled the initial infection found itself in the same place several weeks ago. Both countries report that upon the lifting of restrictions, their populations responded with bravado and disregard for the continued threat. We must not make the same mistake. We can do better, and we must do better. Speaking of contact tracing, the CARES-19 app was developed in partnership with ProudCrowd, creators of the popular Bison Tracker app. CARE-19 is a free mobile app to help slow the spread of COVID-19. This app will help us identify individuals who may have had contact with people who tested positive. Once the app is downloaded, individuals are given a random ID number, and the app anonymously caches the individual's locations throughout the day. Individuals are then encouraged to categorize their movement into different categories like work or grocery store. The app will only store the location of any place a person visits for 10 minutes or more, and the ID number of each individual contains no personal information besides location. Then, if the individual tests positive for COVID-19, they will be given the opportunity to consent to provide their information to the North Dakota Department of Health to help in contact tracing and forecasting the pandemic's progression with accurate real-time data. CARE-19 will continuously be improving going forward. So again, please pause for a moment, find this app in your app store. It's available both for iPhone users and Android users, and share it with your family, your friends, and your colleagues. I would be thrilled to report to to the governor at the end of the day that because of this call, the number of apps downloaded increased significantly. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the revised executive order creates standards for all businesses, including things like adhering to CDC and North Dakota Department of Health guidelines, completing a workplace assessment, limiting occupancy to ensure that 6 feet of social distancing. It's important to note that these restart guidelines apply to all businesses. Next, the executive order creates specific guidance for the following personal contact businesses. Next slide, please. Restaurants, bars, breweries, cafes, recreational facilities, health clubs, athletic facilities, licensed cosmetologists, including estheticians, manicurists, salons, and barbershops, and finally, personal care, including tattoo, body art, body piercing, tanning, and massage. These protocols were developed working with the affected businesses, with more than 60 people from 23 different communities who shared their time and talent in work groups representing the diversity found across their business types. When asked, these volunteers said yes, some even offered before we asked, and represented not just their own business, but their whole industry to ensure broad representation. The goal of these work groups was to ask professionals closest to the work, closest to their community and to their customer to arrive at North Dakota's smart restart protocols that are practical, effective at controlling infection to keep their employees and customers safe, and that inspire consumer confidence so we can gradually achieve our new normal. And they accomplished this, proving that North Dakota, with our hyper-connectedness and our willingness to support one another in a time of crisis, even if we're competitors by day, we can succeed at reopening these businesses and doing it safely. It's possible that many of these work group members are on the line today, so I don't want to miss an opportunity to say thank you out loud. Your efforts are appreciated and we will make a difference. Please imagine a virtual round of applause for your work. Next slide, please. So the result of this effort is standard protocols for the business types listed on this slide, with the workgroup recommendations having been reviewed and approved by the North Dakota Department of Health. Just a few examples of business-specific protocols include for restaurants operating at 50% capacity, for cosmetology-related businesses with reception areas, adjusting to ensure physical distancing requirements are met, like asking customers to remain in their cars to come to the appointment once the prior client has left and cleaning has occurred. For tattoo studios, holding initial planning consultations by video conference, if possible. And for many businesses, screening employee and customer temperatures prior to arrival. I want to mention also that movie theater guidance was provided yesterday. Also affected by the original executive order were larger venues like recreational and athletic facilities and music and entertainment venues. Guidance for these businesses will be provided at a later time. And as a reminder, it is only with these specific protections and all of us working together, businesses, employees, and citizens, that North Dakota will be successful in our smart restart. On this slide, you can see where you can find this information. At ndresponse.gov, there is a new landing page called North Dakota Smart Restart. Today, this site contains guidelines for all employers, specific protocols for businesses affected by executive order, frequently asked questions, a toolkit for your use, and many, many links and resources. This site will continue to evolve in the coming days and weeks and should be your source of reference for information and answers pertaining to North Dakota Smart Restart. A few important things to note. While compliance with the restart standards is mandatory for all business, reopening a business that was closed is voluntary. Tribal nations, counties, cities, and subdivisions may place more stringent restrictions. There have been a number of questions about enforcement. If we all approach this together, we hope this will not be our chief concern. However, note that it is within the authority of the state chief health officer to close businesses if necessary, and also enforcement will be largely a local matter. Next, we will move into an update on small business finance resources through the CARES Act. Before I introduce Al Hout, the North Dakota District SBA Director, I want to say congratulations to North Dakota. Why? Since we were last together 2 weeks ago, we showed the nation what it looks like to mobilize, cooperate, work hard, and get results. As was said earlier, in the initial round of PPP, North Dakota received more dollars per capita based on the number of small businesses than all states of similar size. I attribute this to the urgency and the cooperative spirit with which we act. From the Department of Commerce's swift analysis in the very beginning and announcement of programs through these business briefings attended by thousands of you over 5 weeks, to the Bank of North Dakota's weekly calls to support North Dakota bankers, to a close relationship with our local SBA representatives like Al, and finally, a huge nod to the financial services community. You rallied quickly to be able to make these loans available to customers, and you're still doing it. Thank you for proving what it means to be a North Dakotan. As Al will speak to in a moment, Congress has authorized additional funding for the EIDL and PPP. Al, take it away.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can you hear me okay?
You're welcome. Yes, thank you, Al.
Well, thanks everybody for being on the call today. And I want to echo Michelle's comments about the lending community, and Congressman Armstrong mentioned it as well. We don't have the kind of numbers that we experienced in North Dakota with this program without our local lenders. So kudos to all the lenders across the state who have taken the bull by the horn and used the program to the fullest to help our small business community. And Michelle was right. It was a team effort on a federal, state, and local private level to get the word out. So kind of say before that it's a great state to live in. We roll up our sleeves and help each other out when in times of need, and this is an example, and this is why we choose to live in the great state of North Dakota. With an update on the Paycheck Protection Program, as Senator Hoven mentioned, there was $310 billion appropriated to this program. We started processing at 9:30 a.m. on Monday. As of last night, we've approved $90 billion of the $310 billion. So roughly a little less than a third of the total appropriations. So we expect we will exhaust these funds. The small business demand is there. We expect to use up the funds, but they're not going to be used up overnight. If we look, we've been processing for about 3 days and been a third of the way through it. So we should have another few days of processing these loans, and we'll get there. And I think North Dakota is faring well again in this next go around. A bulk of our lenders are made up of lenders with less than $1 billion in assets. And as Senator Hoven mentioned, the SBA is trying to make sure that we have a time for those lenders to get into the system and access it for the small business community. On Wednesday night, we shut the system down except for these smaller lenders, and I hate to say small because $1 billion is not a small facility, but in the big picture nationally, most of our lenders are small based on that definition and gained access. There was a lot of angst on Monday with the system being overrun. On Tuesday, it seemed to be working much better, and yesterday, the lenders I was visiting with were getting through their applications on a timely basis. So everything seems to be going well this go around, and I expect that again we will be right near the top of market penetration. Just to reiterate that this loan, the Paycheck Protection Loan Program, is designed for employee retention. The loan forgiveness side of it will be, excuse me, based on the company's ability to either keep the employees on staff or hire them back. And any forgiveness amount will be based on that percentage of being able to hire the employees back. Any amount not forgiven will be repaid or will be required to be repaid over the 24-month term at 1%. The forgiveness guidelines are still being developed by the SBA and Treasury policymakers. We hope to have them out soon, and they will be posted on the SBA's PPP specific web page, and there is a link to it in the PowerPoint today. Switching gears a little bit to the economic injury disaster loan update. As the Senator mentioned, we have been appropriated more dollars to approve economic injury disaster loans. However, we are still processing the loan applications from the initial appropriation. And we've had a lot of questions about loan status. The important thing is if you applied for an economic injury disaster loan, you would have gotten a 10-digit application number. If your application number begins with the number 3, that loan application is still being processed on a first-come, first-served basis. I'll caution you, the system has about 5 million applications in process. Our disaster team is ramping up as we speak, adding additional processors to get through this volume. So please have a little patience, but if your application number has a 3, the loan will be reviewed and be processed. We've heard loan advances, again, that loan advance up to $10,000, $1,000 per employee. We're hearing even as of yesterday that businesses in North Dakota are getting those loan advances distributed into their checking account. I wish they had a advance notice, but we've had clients call us and say, I got a loan, I got a deposit in my checking account, not sure where it came from. And if you look where it's the code where it's deposited from, it'll say a disaster code. And after you get the loan advance, they will follow up with an email that that says you can apply for additional loan dollars at that time and provide a process for doing that. Businesses can also get both an economic injury disaster loan and a PPP. If a business gets a loan advance, the up to $10,000, that advance will be deducted from the PPP forgiveness amount. The loan amount under the economic injury disaster loan can be used for longer term financial needs outside of the 8-week payroll funding that you get under the Paycheck Protection Program. So we've had a lot of questions about what if after the 8 weeks I'm not up to full operations and can't quite cash flow. That's where the economic injury disaster loan can provide long-term working capital support for your business. And again, you can get both the economic injury disaster loan and the PPP loan. The only difference is the forgiveness will be under the PPP program will be reduced by the EIDL loan advance. As of right now, the application portal is still closed, waiting for our disaster loan staff to get through some of the backlog in applications. Once we get through some of that backlog, we will be opening the SBA EIDL application portal again. And again, the web link is in the PowerPoint slides for today. With that, I will turn it over to Eric Hardmeyer with the Bank of North Dakota.
Well, thank you, Al.
You're welcome.
And thank you to Eric and Michelle for the opportunity to present these programs. You know, as I mentioned before, when I was part of the program, the idea for the Bank of North Dakota was really to understand, you know, what the needs were going to be after the federal programs were utilized. You know, as Congressman Armstrong said there were, opportunities and potential for some businesses to fall through the cracks. What we've tried to do is really examine what those issues were, what the businesses were that were not getting their needs met, and have really focused on what those needs might be. We also, of course, did not want to duplicate efforts. We don't have the ability that the federal government has to issue this kind of debt with those kind of features, but we do have experience at the Bank of North Dakota offering disaster programs. So we wanted to build off of our experience offering these programs before and really concentrate on those areas that had unmet needs. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So we have two programs that I'm going to talk about today. The first one is the SELF program, and I'll get into the details in a little bit. The other program is what we're going to call the CPR COVID PACE response program. And as I mentioned earlier, the intent of these two programs is to really build off of and complement, the existing programs that Al just talked about, really helping businesses deal with the financial issues with startup after they have been either, shuttered by executive order or traffic has slowed down. So again, building off of our experience with other disaster programs, we concluded that the best idea here is to provide low-cost, long-term working capital loans to North Dakota businesses, providing cash flow to restart those businesses. As Al talked about, the PPP programs really were an opportunity to provide a month or two of support for employee issues. What we're concentrating on is, startup working capital to get back into the game here. So next slide, please. The overall intent of the program, as I said, is to help restart businesses. Ag producers, government entities are not eligible. There are separate and distinct programs that each one of those industries have that we didn't feel we wanted to duplicate or to use, part of the precious resources that we had here, because those needs are going to be met elsewhere. Of course, the business must be located in North Dakota. When I'll get into some of the other program features with the CPR, there are large companies that have, headquarters outside of North Dakota, but they have part of their operations here in North Dakota. We want to concentrate on those part of the operations here in North Dakota. Unlike SBA, what we're going to concentrate on is you can use one program or the other. And I think what you'll see as I go through that is that these are really meant to really attract distinct different cohorts in terms of business types. So we'll get into that in a minute. These programs did become available yesterday. We've already received applications, and we are anticipating a very kind of robust use of these programs. We have redirected a lot of our staff and resources to make sure that we can meet the needs in a timely fashion. So next slide, please. Okay, next slide too. So the first program that I want to talk about is called the Small Business Employment Loan Fund. And you can see a couple of requirements under eligibility. Again, these are small businesses impacted by, the executive order. These would represent businesses with 10 employees or less. And, typically, I guess you could think of them as, coffee shops, hair salon, restaurants, the things that Michelle talked about earlier in terms of those that were impacted by the executive order, really concentrating on the very kind of micro business type application. These loan programs are going to be written with real soft underwriting criteria, as you will see. Our thought is to get the money out the door to help these businesses as much as we can. You'll see the loan amount is the maximum loan amount is $50,000. What we've talked about is trying to devise an amount that would get them on their feet, and came up with a solution that about 6 months worth of operating expenses plus interest that they may have incurred would be the amount needed to replenish inventory. Total, again, a maximum of about $50,000, whichever it is. Next slide. Again, use of proceeds, again, working capital, recurring expenses, replenished inventory. I know we're going to get a lot of questions about refinancing. What we will allow and think is appropriate is that about 20% of the loan amount can be used to refinance debt that may have been taken out as part of a bridge loan to get to a point where businesses can open up. What we really don't want funds to be used for is to buy capital purchases or business expansion, or refinance debt other than what I talked about earlier, or to provide distributions or dividends to owners. We really are working to get them to build up working capital so that when business returns to normal or near normal, they have the ability to sustain their business operations. Interest rate, again, as I said, these are the underwriting will be soft on these. We really want to get the money out the door. Interest rates will be fixed at 1%. These are 10-year loans. No collateral will be required on any loan under $25,000, and we will just hook into existing collateral requirements that the bank may have on those loans over $25,000. Again, these loans now would all be originated by a local bank. So you wouldn't come to the Bank of North Dakota. You would go to your local bank. They would originate the loan and sell 100% of it to the Bank of North Dakota. We will provide them with some, origination fees to help them kind of offset the cost of their origination fees. So next slide, please. Okay, so next, let me get into the more substantial of the two programs in terms of dollar availability. This program we're going to call the COVID PACE Recovery Program. A lot of you are familiar with our PACE program. This is to take a part of the playbook out of the PACE program and out of our disaster program that we've issued before, and really combine the two into what we call the COVID PACE response. As I said, this is meant for a larger type of business. Again, any business located in North Dakota can use this program. Loan amounts are listed there for you. For those businesses of 500 or fewer, the maximum loan amount is a lesser of $5 million. Or again, you'll see what we've thought about, and that is 6 months of operating expenses plus interest expense that you may have paid. For businesses over 500, this is where one of the real unmet needs have come in, because most of the programs that Al has talked about, PPP program, all are for companies with 500 or less FTE. So we really did want to make sure that we were meeting all the needs. We also found out that in some of the cases with the PPP, there was specific ownership structures that did not make them, not allow them to qualify. Under this program, the CPR program, we've taken that into consideration, and we'll open it up a little bit there as well. So next slides, please. Use of proceeds, again, this is to support working capital, to build up working capital for those businesses, again, impacted by reduced business as a result of COVID activity, build working capital. The prohibitions in the program, again, are very similar to the other program. We don't want them to be used to go out and buy a bunch of new capital purchases, refinance debt, except where we've talked about before, or to relocate business. Again, this is startup working capital as businesses look to get back to normal operations. So one of the real interesting features of the COVID PACE, and different from the SELF, is that the interest rate will be to the banks would be 3.75% up to 5 years. B&D will be providing a service fee to the lender. The borrower in this case will receive an interest rate buy down, and so that the borrower will only pay 1%. And that is, of course, in line with what our other PACE programs, our Flex PACE, Portable Housing PACE, Biofuels PACE, and regular PACE program allow. Each borrower will be eligible up to $500,000, and that can be spread across multiple different business types, but it is limited to $500,000 per common borrower. The funding for this, the $200 million that we're going to use in buy down, which is far and away larger than any amount we've ever had for PACE programs. I can tell you in my history at the bank, the most we've ever had for buy down for any biennium is about $35 million. So this absolutely is exponentially greater. We're talking $200 million available for buy down. And you know, the way the buy down program works is there's a leverage factor of about 9 to 1. And so that means with $200 million of buy down, that would allow us to make about $1.8 billion in loans across the state and across the industries that we've so we think, as you listen to Al talk about, you know, the first round of PPP in North Dakota was a little over 11,000 loans for about $1.5 billion. This program will basically do a little bit more than that, and we're excited to provide this. We think we're going to meet a niche out there in terms of providing stability for those companies, you know, charging ahead under this, you know, this new economy and this new normal. So with that, I do also want to thank the banks out there. They, of course, carry the water for us. These loans, again, are all originated by local banks. And, you know, they've been pressed into service here with the PPP program and our programs. You know, they're working hard every day in their communities and for their customers to make sure that when we get on to the business of business as usual or the new norm, that they have worked, you know, to help their businesses with their needs. So, you know, really hats off to those banks out there that have been really working hard to meet the needs of their customers. So with that, next slide, please. Okay, I guess that would do it for me. Let me turn it over to Brian Klipfel, the Executive Director of Job Service and WSI. Brian?
Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
I'm going to just give a rundown on unemployment insurance updates. The governor has been really good about giving a lot of those at the, you know, a lot of the information at the briefings every day. First of all, I'm going to compliment the job service staff for the things that they've accomplished. We've had a job service staff, you know, we're geared up and we're probably short staffed for handling 20,500 claims a year like we did last year. And so far this year for unemployment insurance since March 16th, we've had 67,833 regular unemployment claims being filed, which is astronomical. And probably one of the bright things about that is the numbers start coming down a little bit. When we first started this March 16th and got into it a week or so, you know, we were getting, you know, a couple 2,000, 2,500 claims per day. Now, the last couple of days, yesterday, or the day before's totals on the 28th, we had 858 claims coming in. And yesterday we had 709 claims coming in. So that's a good sign. So we're going to knock on wood, and hopefully that continues to happen. Couple of the CARES Act programs that we've already accomplished, and which has taken above and beyond handling additional claims. We've had to do some reprogramming. We've taken care of the waiting week. So that's there's no more waiting week for claimants. We have completed the federal pandemic unemployment compensation program. That's at $600 extra per week. And we started paying that on April 15th. The other federal program is pandemic unemployment assistance, and that's for the self-employed independent contractors, gig workers. And we've started paying on that program already. And our first payments were sent out the 29th, and then we have some more payments sent out today. But the vast majority of the payments went out yesterday. And I know for the self-employed and those, this is something that they've been wondering, why haven't we received it? It's been 4 or 5 weeks, but you know, we've done a very good job trying to get that program implemented. And in fact, we're probably in one of the top 10 states that have implemented already. The rest of the states haven't. So we've done very good in that, but it doesn't really do any good for those people who have not received it yet. But the payments have gone out. We mailed the first payment out on a debit card, so it's coming via mail. It's loaded, and it would have all the weeks that you're going to get for the PUA, plus the $600 extra for that FPUC program. And so that's really good news. We've had about 9,717 PUA claims being filed, so they're continually coming in. And the last program is the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, and that's at 13 weeks additional payments for those individuals whose benefits exhausted. And so we're going to start working on that program now that we have the other ones implemented. All these programs take a lot of programming changes to our system, which takes a lot of time. And I guess again, I want to compliment our staff for what they've accomplished. Next slide, please. The next slide, there was a question that came in on this, but this is the part of the CARES Act, Section 2103, that talks about emergency unemployment relief for government entities and nonprofit organizations. So a lot of the business in the states are contributory agencies. Those are the ones that pay the tax rates every quarter, pay what's owed. And then if you remember Governor's Executive Order 2020-8, we're spreading those claim costs for those individuals throughout the whole trust fund, so that won't affect individual agencies. However, there's another group of employers and nonprofits out there that are reimbursable. And what that means is that if they have people go on unemployment insurance, they have to reimburse job service for the cost of the unemployment insurance. And so under the CARES Act, the federal government will reimburse 50% of that, which is good. However, there's another 50% that these nonprofits and government entities and tribal entities need to pay for themselves, which is a real hardship for a lot of them. So there is, I don't know if there will be any additional CARES Act programs that may cover that or whatever, but it has been brought up, and I know even on Senator Hoeven's call a couple of weeks ago, that was one of the issues that we brought up, was that how can these reimbursable agencies get reimbursed for that other 50%? So that's one of the things that's happening right now. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trust fund. And the trust fund is the fund that we pay our benefits out of. So when you pay your taxes on your payroll taxes, that's where it goes into the trust fund, so that we have enough money to pay for the unemployment claim. Prior to this March 16th date, we were doing very well with our trust fund. It was solvent, and We had enough money in there. Since this pandemic has started, our trust fund went down to probably, it was about 205 million, probably before all this, back in February, before all this happened. Right now, our trust fund's at about 129.4 million. And if we keep paying claims like we are, we paid about 66 million claims in April. We're looking at another around 80 million in May, and probably about mid-June to end of June, our fund could be solvent, or insolvent rather. So we're going to need an influx of money. We have options. We can either borrow from United States Department of Labor or the Bank of North Dakota, or a better option is Senator Hoeven, Governor Burgum, Lieutenant Governor Sanford have been working to help us get some of that money for our trust fund out of that coronavirus relief fund that the state has. So hopefully that will work out. And then otherwise it's going to be a big burden on our employers in the state to get the fund up to where it should be. So hopefully we can get that done. So that's part of what we're looking forward to. We're hoping that that all works out, and we're continuing working with the congressional delegation, the governor's office, and then others to see that we can make sure we get some money for our trust fund. Next slide, please. A couple of the questions that came in, and I think I tried to cover the pandemic unemployment insurance when I know we've had some self-employed. We're wondering about what those. And so hopefully we get those payments out here soon for you, so that, I know it's been 4 or 5 weeks, but like I said before, we still have done a very good job. So one of the frequently asked questions, if I'm self-employed and don't feel I can meet the North Dakota Smart Restart protocols, am I still eligible for unemployment insurance? And I'm going to give the best answer I can, but initially, the business will not lose unemployment benefits. With the opening being voluntary, we would be more considerate on the circumstances surrounding why they are not open yet. And if it can be tied back to COVID-19, it would be a lot easier to continue with unemployment benefits. So yes, you can, under those situations, you can probably continue with your benefits. The other question is, what if my employees refuse to come back to work? Well, if you have work and you need your employees to come back to their jobs, they should return, or must return, or that's part of the guidelines. If you have an issue with employees not responding to your callback or not wanting to come back, you need to contact Job Service North Dakota. We set up a special number at 701-328-2814. This number is only for those employers who have tried to get their employees back to work, but because of some reason they don't want to come back. So we need to know that, so that if those employees are collecting the unemployment insurance benefit, we can look at removing them off of that benefit. So that concludes what I have, my report. I think our next presenter will be Insurance Commissioner John Gottfried.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
I just got a real brief, you can go to the next slide, a real brief update for you all. I wanted to flag an issue that may be coming down the road. I'm sure many of you have heard about the antibody testing or serological testing that is coming. Governor Burgum announced last week that the state has purchased 150,000 antibody tests. Just want to again flag for you that health insurance traditionally covers medically necessary testing and treatment. And as it currently stands, the public health surveillance or employment screenings, which traditionally this antibody testing may fall under, would not be covered by health insurance. If an employee goes in and there's a licensed physician says, yes, you need to get this antibody test, or yes, you need to get this done, that would be covered. That would be considered medically necessary. But simple public health surveillance, or if you're going to be screening your employees using antibody testing before they come back to work or throughout the course of this, those traditionally would not be covered. So I just wanted to make sure we flag that for you all, so we don't see an uptick in claims coming to insurance companies that would ultimately be denied and then be pushed back to either the employer or the employee. So just wanted to, there are probably more to come on this as we go forward on this, but as it stands, again, as it stands right now, you will not be able to claim these through your health insurance coverage unless it's been advised by a physician to get this test done or a part of your COVID treatment or some other traditional physician-based testing. So just wanted to make sure you're all aware of that. You can certainly reach out to our office if you've got more questions on that. That was my portion. I'll happily turn it over now to Eric Spencer, the President and CEO of the Greater North Dakota Chamber.
Thanks, Commissioner. And thanks to everyone for participating today on the North Dakota Department of Commerce's COVID-19 business brief. On behalf of the Greater North Dakota Chamber, we want to remind you that the recording and materials from today's session will be available at ndresponse.gov. Go to the COVID-19 page and click on the businesses and business and employers button. The recording and materials will also be available at ndchamber.com. Again, remember that the materials from today's presentation, the slide deck, have been vetted by the North Dakota Department of Commerce. So please feel free to use those. Click on the links as they are deemed safe. I want to remind everyone of a couple quick things. First is that next week we are going to have another special business briefing. This one will be featuring President of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, Neil Kashkari. He'll be discussing the economic impact of COVID-19 and include North Dakota specific data. He'll also be talking about what the future holds in his opinion. This is going to be a neat session because our Commerce Commissioner, Michelle Comer, will be interviewing him using your questions. So registration is open now at ndchamber.com. Register, make sure to ask a question, and again, our Commerce Commissioner will be selecting some of those as she interviews Neil Kashkari. I also want to remind everyone what Michelle Comer said earlier. It's a good time to reach out to people, see how they're doing. If people are doing some neat things, please feel free to share that with the North Dakota Department of Commerce or tag them on Twitter. And at ndresponse.gov, there's a link to the CARE 19 app. It's available on both the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. So it's available for all devices, so take time to download that. Finally, on behalf of the Greater North Dakota Chamber and the North Dakota Department of Commerce, thank you again for joining us, and stay safe until next week, Thursday at 11 a.m.
Thank you everyone for joining us. The live event is now ended.